Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, it's the 17th of July. Today is day 650 since October 7th of 2023. This is the weekly update, and honestly, sometimes it feels like there's so much happening, not only in Gaza, but there have been escalations in Syria over the past week where dozens of people have been killed. It can be overwhelming, the amount of news that's happening in a day, let alone in the week. So I'll summarize in the past week, starting with Gaza. The Israeli Defense Ministry has a proposal where they would force hundreds of thousands of Palestinians into a contained area in South Gaza. This plan has been discussed previously. We've heard whispers of it. It came up again this week. It's being said that that would derail negotiations. Hamas said that, but others internationally have said that as well. The former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, I met with him a few months ago. He has said that the actions of Israel and Gaza could be considered war crimes. That was before this announcement. He said that this proposal resembles a ghetto. It is a deliberately obstructive demand. He said what is being described as a plan, quote, humanitarian city amounts to a concentration camp. Now, he is a former prime minister of the Israeli state. You know, he worked very closely with Abbas. They came so close to having a peace agreement on Jerusalem. I've seen lots of details about that. Israeli legal experts have warned that the plan would violate international law and could amount to war crimes or the crime of genocide. Churches for Middle East Peace put out a statement about that plan yesterday on the 16th of July, condemning the plan to forcibly relocate Palestinians to camps in Rafah. We'll talk in a minute about how the city of Rafah has been divided in two over the past week, but CMEP rejects this plan to forcibly establish humanitarian camps atop of the ruins of the city of Rafah. This proposal would displace and confine more than 600,000 Palestinians, restricting their freedom of movement and coercively removing them from Gaza. Forced displacement is a clear violation of international law. We call on the global church, the international community, and the U.S. government to hold the Israeli government accountable and to stop the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. It's hard to put to words, you know, this is a part of what the Israeli government has talked about. The Israeli government has a separate division that they establish, that the goal of the division is to encourage or allow Palestinians who want to leave to be able to leave, where they'll even give them a bit of money. They'll help facilitate getting them out of Gaza with the idea that they would never return. And this is just an extension of that plan for the forced displacement of the more than 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza. On Wednesday, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is backed by Israel and the U.S., acknowledged for the first time one incident at its sites. The situation was described as 20 Palestinians trying to get food who were killed amid a chaotic and dangerous surge at a South Gaza aid distribution center. 19 people were trampled to death in the stampede, and one person was stabbed to death. The chaos of food being distributed, I don't know if you've watched the videos, but it's hard to put words to, that people are so desperately hungry. You have not only desperation to get food, which is inadequate, that is being distributed, but then there are attacks against people because there's not food available. And so that's one of the realities that's happening in Gaza. Food is desperately scarce. Malnutrition rates among children have doubled since Israel restricted the food at the beginning of March. UNRWA said it's citing a finding that 10.2% of children who have been screened at UNRWA clinics in June were acutely malnourished. Tuesday, it was reported that 99 Gazans were killed, over 252 were wounded. On Monday, 31 people were killed in Gaza. The Israeli military said that three soldiers were killed in North Gaza in those 24 hours. Separately, the UN agencies reiterated their joint warning that without more fuel, healthcare, food, and sanitation, that all services in Gaza will soon shut down. Over the weekend, 28 Palestinians in Gaza, including 4 children, were killed. It was reported on Saturday. The 4 children and 2 women were among at least 13 people who were killed in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. Part of why I go through these days, and I don't go through every single day, is just dozens of people are continued to be killed in Gaza day after day after day after day. And we're at now 650 days today. And so I think it's important for us to give witness, for us to not give up using our voices. This situation is not getting better. It's continuing to deteriorate. The death toll this past week has now surpassed 58,000 people. Sometime between Sunday and Monday, there was a brutal report of an Israeli airstrike that killed 10 people, 6 of whom were children, as they were in line to fill water containers in central Gaza. Israeli military said that this was, quote, a technical error that led to the strike, targeting a, quote, terrorist, and that, it was a mistaken target. And yet 6 people were killed, 6 children were killed, 10 people in total were killed while they sought water. This week, it was reported that the Israeli opened a military-controlled route. This was the route I was speaking of that is dividing the city of Rafah. I'm sorry, not Rafah. I've been misspeaking. Han Yunis, spanning from east to west. So this is not in Rafah. This is in Han Yunis, effectively splitting the city in 2. The flow of aid into Gaza has not increased despite an agreement between Israel and the EU last week. That just was reported yesterday. Over the weekend, the UN said on Saturday that the fuel shortage in Gaza has reached critical levels. Fuel doesn't just mean the ability to be able to run cars. Fuel is needed to run generators, to run pumps for water, to run hospitals. And so the UN said in this statement that the lack of fuel means lifelines will vanish for more than 2.1 million people who are teetering on the edge of starvation. The statement by the UN was immediately after Israel announced, the Israeli coordinator for government activities, COGAT, in the territories, said that it had transferred 150 liters of fuel into Gaza. And so we're hearing reports like that from the Israeli government, and then we're getting reports from on the ground in Gaza that fuel is not getting to where it needs to be. Or if it's getting there, it's just not enough. Aid groups have identified that there's a deliberate withholding of baby food, and that is being used as a weapon of war. The groups, these international development agencies, claim that Israel is deliberately hampering the entry of baby formula into Gaza, and child malnutrition continues to climb. There are no reports of significant progress this past week related to a ceasefire. What's been on the table is a 60-day temporary truce. The Israel-Hamas ceasefire talks in Doha have officially stalled. It was reported on Saturday. According to an Israeli official, significant gaps remain. The issues that we've heard about have to do with Israel's military deployment in Gaza and where the Israeli troops would withdraw to, and Hamas's presence in the territory once the ceasefire goes into effect. And just a reminder, we're not talking about a comprehensive permanent ceasefire. We're not talking about an end to all of this. One of the things that Netanyahu has said is that they would only agree to 60 days of a temporary truce if they're allowed to go back to war afterwards. Now, the Trump administration has had numerous responses to that, saying they want an end to the war, but it's not proceeding in that direction, and progress has not been made. There's been a lot happening in the occupied West Bank. It was announced this week that the E1 settlement block is being continued. So renewed plans for the controversial construction of this settlement block that's in East Jerusalem. This is around Ma'al Damim. If you've been on Route 1 between East Jerusalem and the Dead Sea, this would effectively cut the West Bank in 2. Progress on this has been delayed since 2021. There was sharp international criticism, and it's back on the table again. This would create one contiguous line of Jewish settlements from the central West Bank leading up to Jerusalem. This would thwart any possibility for a future Palestinian state. Ironic, considering that the two-state solution conference that was supposed to happen in June is now scheduled for July 28th and 29th in New York City. That's the conference that's being convened by the Saudis and the French. And so while the world is talking about a two-state solution, it's gone, or at least disappearing right in front of our eyes. There have been numerous settler attacks, extremist settlers throughout the West Bank, but particularly in the outskirts of Ramallah. Settlers attacked the Christian village of Taibeh at least 4 times in the past several days. Homes were set on fire, olive groves, cultural and religious landmarks. This included a Byzantine cemetery and fires near the 5th century Al-Hadar church. CMEP put out a statement about this that was shared hundreds and hundreds of times. We have an article coming out soon in Modern Orthodox that talks more about this incident. We've been standing alongside of the 3 local priests in Taibeh village. The patriarchs and heads of churches did a solidarity visit to Taibeh. Most international countries that are engaged sent a delegate. All of the main countries at play sent a delegate except for the United States. The attacks injured 58 Palestinians and displaced 67 more. In Israel, it was a big week for Ambassador Mike Huckabee. He's the U.S. ambassador to Israel. He visited Prime Minister Netanyahu's corruption trial proceedings, quote, in an act of friendship. He posed with a Bugs Bunny plush toy as a symbol mocking the trial against Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's being brought forward on charges of corruption. I'll talk more about Mike Huckabee when I talk about the U.S. One of Israel's ultra-Orthodox parties announced that they quit Prime Minister Netanyahu's ruling coalition. This is over the dispute concerning the conscription exemptions for the ultra-Orthodox. This move, if it's implemented, would leave Netanyahu with a razor-thin majority, 61 seats in the Knesset of a total of 120 seats. As you know, if you've been following Israeli politics at all, the Netanyahu coalition has been very vulnerable. An IDF combat soldier in training attempted suicide while he was at an army base this week. He's in serious condition. The issue of suicides in the Israeli military has been on the rise. In the past 2 weeks, 4 soldiers have committed suicide, 2 conscripts and 2 reservists after being released from the extended war campaign. I would presume in Gaza, but I don't know that for certain. Sources in the Haredi factions, that's the ultra-Orthodox, say that they would dissolve the Knesset if a draft exemption law is not reached within 3 months. So as I mentioned, Netanyahu's coalition is significantly at risk. Israeli officials signaled that they want the UN to remain the key avenue for humanitarian deliveries in Gaza. Deputy head of the World Food Program, Carl Scow, said this on Friday, but we've not seen that implemented yet. So the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is still working. We know that when GHF is around, the deaths increase. The UN said on Friday that nearly 800 people have been killed while trying to access food in Gaza. These are near or adjacent to Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribution sites. This has happened since the easing of the more than 2-month blockade on deliveries. So this is since late May. Al Jazeera leaked an exposed Israeli plan to annex 40% of the Gaza Strip, which would trap 700,000 Palestinians in Rafah. Moving on to the broader Middle East, there have still been going diplomatic, messages back and forth in terms of Iran. Trump told Netanyahu he favors a diplomatic settlement with Tehran, but he does not otherwise object to further Israeli strikes on the country if they move forward towards a nuclear weapon. Iranian President Pezeshkian suffered leg injuries, which we did not hear about during one of the previous Israeli attacks on the secret underground facility in Tehran. This happened last month, but it just came out about that injury this past week. A consensus that Iran must relaunch nuclear negotiations with the U.S. is emerging in political circles in Iran. So that's the update in that regard. There have been conversations about Israel doing another attack on Iran. I know that a couple of weeks ago, there were also concerns about missiles being fired back towards Israel, but things have not yet escalated in that regard. Iran and Israel formally have a ceasefire agreement from the recent exchange of missiles. In Lebanon, the health ministry said an Israeli strike on South Lebanon on Saturday killed 1 person. This is the latest attack, despite there being a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. There are regular attacks on South Lebanon, and there's a death here or a death here. The Bekaa Valley was struck by the Israeli military on Tuesday of this week, and 12 people died. 3 were Lebanese. There was a family of 5 Syrians, and it was not reported who the others who were killed. The Iranian foreign minister Araghchi warned, this should be under Iran. I misplaced it under Lebanon, but Araghchi's the foreign minister of Iran. He warned this past weekend that a so-called snapback on U.S. sanctions would end Europe's role in the issuing of Tehran's nuclear program. Moving on to Syria, there have been significant escalations in Syria this week between the Israeli, Druze, and Syrian forces. This started last Friday or before the weekend. There were armed clashes between Sunni Bedouin tribal fighters and Druze militias. This was in South Syria. At least 30 people were killed. Sectarian violence between the Bedouin groups and the militia killed at least 50 people on the second day, which I think, I don't know actually which day it started, but I do know that the clashes continued through Wednesday, yesterday. There was mention of a ceasefire, then there were more clashes. The IDF said they were working to return dozens of Druze civilians who'd crossed from Israel into Syria near Majd al-Shams. During the days of violence between the Druze and the Syrians, Netanyahu said, "We have no interest in developing the conflict with Syria." But then the Israelis struck the Syrian government forces and weapons in the Druze majority city of Zweda. So one day, Netanyahu says he doesn't want to develop the conflict. I feel like it was the same day that the attacks happened, but within hours or days, we know Israel did strike both South Syria, and then yesterday, the IDF struck the Syrian Defense Headquarters. These are the headquarters of the state. They also struck near the presidential palace in Damascus. The IDF confirmed that Israel's Air Force struck the Syrian Defense Headquarters and the presidential palace. The army said the Syrian regime is conducting the fighting from the defense headquarters, and so we are sending forces to Sweda. The IDF confirmed the Air Force targeted a military site within Syrian's regime. And so there's been a lot of chaos in South Syria. There was a video that was released with an Israeli flag being raised in the city of Zweda in South Syria. This Israeli flag was being raised by the Druze. This is only about 43 miles. I mean, I suppose 43 miles is far, but this is 43 miles from the border with Israel. Secretary of State Rubio yesterday said he's very concerned about these strikes. The fighting has to stop. The Trump administration asked Israel to stop their strikes on Syrian government forces. Turkey has said that the Israeli strikes targeting military headquarters are aiming to sabotage peace. Moving on to Yemen, the UN Security Council yesterday authorized continued reporting about attacks on ships in the Red Sea. This reporting has been certified through January 15th, 2026. So this is monitoring the Houthi rebels' attacks in the Red Sea by the UN Security Council and the UN. Fighters who are allied with Yemen's exiled government said they seized 750 tons of Iranian-supplied weaponry. So this is the exiled government of Syria that's fighting against the Houthis. They seized 750 tons of Iranian-supplied weaponry bound for Houthi rebels. And yesterday afternoon, East Coast time, the Yemeni Houthis said they launched 3 drones towards the south of Israel. I already mentioned, in terms of international responses, the 2-state conference that's happening at the UN at the end of July. The foreign ministers of France, Germany, the UK on Monday agreed with Secretary of State Rubio to set the end of August as a deadline for making a nuclear deal with Iran. And so that is quite significant. So August is the de facto deadline for reaching a nuclear deal with Iran for the US, France, Germany, and the UK. In the US, I talked about settler attacks on the occupied West Bank. On Friday, one of the people who was killed in those attacks was Saifullah. He's called Saif Musalat. Musalat was a 20-some-year-old Palestinian American killed by Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. Reports indicate that he was beaten and that ambulances were stopped from reaching him. when he was killed, another Palestinian man was shot dead. Churches for Middle East Peace did put out a statement about that. We're calling for an investigation. And this was where I wanted to tell you that it was quite significant. Ambassador Huckabee, U.S. ambassador to Israel, called on Israeli authorities to aggressively investigate what he called the murder of this Palestinian American citizen in a criminal and terrorist act. This is quite significant because he's talking about Israelis being terrorists and a criminal and terrorist act being committed by Israeli settlers, which is not typical for the language of Ambassador Mike Huckabee. So that is quite significant. 3 independent experts in UN's top human rights body have resigned. They're citing personal reasons, but it's believed that happened because of the recent sanctions by the United States against Francesca Albanese, who has been a special rapporteur related to the Middle East. So I wanted to be sure to call to your attention Mike Huckabee's comments. Also, I wanted to let you know the pro-Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil has sued the Trump administration for $20 million over his imprisonment. A spokesperson for the Columbia Group praised, this is actually from a far-right Israeli news source that said that the pro-Palestinian activism, they called him anti-Israel. They said that there was praising of the October 7th attacks. But I wanted to let you know Mahmoud Khalil is suing the Trump administration. Finally, I wanted to just close with an update on some things that are happening with the Christian community in the Middle East. There is a church in South Syria that has been burned as violence has spread through those rural villages. This report comes from Al-Surra al-Kabira in Syria, South Syria. In the early morning hours on Tuesday, flames consumed the Greek Roman Catholic Mar Michael Church in the village of Al-Surra al-Kabira. This is a small, predominantly Christian community. It's nestled in the countryside of Soweto. This is the Soweto governance. Not the city. The attack is believed to be an act of arson. This is the second church that's been targeted in less than a month. You'll recall the suicide bombing at the Orthodox Mar Elias Church in Damascus. Father Boutros Aljut, who's the church's priest and spiritual leader of the community, expressed sorrow and outrage. But the village itself has been subjected to looting and destruction. They did not stop at the church, he said on social media. They burned, ransacked our homes, they shattered our windows, they stole our belongings, and they have set our lives aflame. The European Syriac Union condemned the attack. This morning, the Mar Michael Church in the village of Al-Surra al-Kabira was set on fire in an act of arson. The following, of course, this is following that attack on Mar Elias Church as well. Christians in Syria are concerned. They're concerned for their safety. They're concerned about the growing patterns of violence. You know, this Mar Michael Church is a modest stone structure. It's deep within the roots. It's a historic church of local tradition. It has stood as a spiritual and cultural landmark for generations in Al-Surra al-Kabira. It's more than just a house of worship. It served as a gathering point for community events. It is also a symbol of resilience in a region that has been long known for its religious and ethnic diversity. The father, priest Aljut, said the church is not just made of stones. It is built on faith, faith that still lives in our hearts, and we will rebuild it. So be in prayer for the ongoing and intensifying violence in the district of Soweto and in this province. This is where those Druze militia and the tribal armed groups, in addition to government forces, have been having conflicts where dozens of people have been killed in past days. And so we're very, very concerned about the condition of Christians in Syria and Christians in the broader Middle East. I mentioned that it was just reported as well that the Holy Family Church in Gaza was attacked. We know that the priest, Father Romanelli, was injured. We're waiting to hear more about that, and a statement will be coming out about that from Churches for Middle East Peace sometime today. So may God go before us in our continued efforts, and may peace come quickly. In the name of Christ. Amen.